My father once took a polygraph test at work. The man running the test looked at him and said something strange. He said, "Sir, your scales didn't move." And when I got older, I realized something. That's how assigned men move. You can tell a lot about a man by how he moves. Not when things were easy, but when pressure shows up. Because movement reveals conditioning, what a man has absorbed over time. Now, it can be unlearned, but usually that's kind of how it works. Why do you think Denzel was so proficient at doing training day? He'd absorbed training day over time on the streets, in real life, in real time. And most of us didn't learn how to move from books. We learned from watching people around us. For me, that started with my dad, Floyd Henderson. Quiet man, reserved, not very verbal, but a great man nonetheless. I remember him telling me the story about that polygraph, that all the employees had to take a polygraph test at his job because someone was stealing. And after the test was over, he said the man who administered the test pulled him to the side and asked him something. He said, "Are you always like this?" My dad said, "What do you mean?" The man said, "Sir, your scales didn't move." Think about that for a second. Most people's hearts beats change, the nerves show up on that machine. The pulse changes, but my dad's scale did not move. That was pretty much my dad. Truthful, honest, integrity. And when a man moves like that long enough, fellas, people can feel it. Before he even says a word, you start paying attention to how he moves instead of what he says because he doesn't say a lot. Because the truth is, real leadership shows up in how a man moves when pressure enters the room. Not louder, not more emotional, just steadier. When the temperature in the room starts rising, then you become the thermostat. You stay steady because children are watching how a man moves, how dad moves, how pop moves, how father moves. And sometimes that means you're the only one calm in the room. Everybody else is reacting, everybody else is emotional, and you're sitting there steady. Not because you don't feel it, because somebody in the house has to be the center. Does that make sense? Your wife watches how you move. People at work watch how you move. And when a man begins to understand what's on his shoulders, he starts moving differently. Think about it. My dad, he moved with patience, with understanding, with control. I'm still working on that. Some days I'm close. Some days I'm still under construction. But he was the type of guy who could say three words and somehow that was the whole conversation. Believe me. I'd be talking for 5 minutes straight and he'd just say, "All right now." That was it. Conversation over. And somehow you understood everything that he meant. Then fast forward later in life, I had a mentor come along. Got me around 27 years old. best man in my wedding, son's godfather, oldest son's godfather, solid brother, Greg Phillips, the Deke. We call him that, short for Deacon. He stayed with me a long time and watched me listen and talk and climb up trees that he later had to talk me down a lot of times. Wasn't as quiet as Dad, but he taught me something just as important. Taught me how to be tempered, how you don't have to hit every problem head on. Sometimes you can back into them. How to think before you move. I learned something very important. Boys react, men respond. Now, I also have to mention Orange Henderson, my mother. I know this is about men, but she played a major role in raising me. Now, let me say this before I go any further. And don't misunderstand me. This is not a criticism of women. My mother was strong, and women raise strong men every day. And in my house, mother was a strong-willed woman, vocal. Sometimes, in my opinion, barking. Have you ever seen a little dog that thinks he's a big dog? I mean, a dog that weighs about 9 pounds, but his mind is as big as a German Shepherd, barking at everything: the mailman, the wind, the leaves, his shadow. Now, let me be clear. My mother wasn't just barking. If that gate opened, she would come out. I mean, she would fight if she had to. Didn't back down from much. But watching that and then watching my dad move completely the opposite taught me something about how assigned men move. Let me give you an example. When I was 16, I asked my dad something that had been on my mind. I said, Dad, why you let mother always tell you what to do? My dad didn't react. He didn't bark. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, you know how your mother is. That was it. Conversation over. Cut. And at 16 years old, I didn't understand that. But I understand it now. Because sometimes strength isn't about winning the moment. Sometimes strength is about maintaining the peace. But peace is not the same. A lot of times, men want to maintain peace so long, you seem to slowly disappear. And disappearing is not the assignment. Because when boys grow up around certain energy, sometimes we learn to move the same way. Quick reaction, quick emotion, quick response. But wisdom teaches men to move differently, doesn't it? One writer said, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty. The man who controls his reaction is stronger than the man who conquers a city. That means strength isn't loud, it's controlled. Another writer says, let every man be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to react. How about that? Sounds like discipline, doesn't it? That's emotional control. And purpose seems to change how a man moves. It really does. When we understand what's on our shoulders, we stop explaining ourselves all the time, which is not a bad thing. Not because of arrogance, but because we are clear now. Crystal, when a gentleman is still searching for himself, he spends a lot of time trying to explain himself. But a man who understands his assignment, his alignment or realignment, he moves with a quiet confidence. Everybody won't understand what he's doing. That's okay. Everybody won't agree with what he's doing. And the truth is, they're really not supposed to. Because purpose is rarely understood by the crowd. Because it's for you, not someone else. And when you begin to carry the weight well, people stop asking questions about your words. They start paying attention to your movement, how you're moving. And I said this about second wind on multiple occasions now. It's about assignment. You're not late. You've just been assigned. And you've been assigned because you're ready and you're prepared for it. Assigned men don't panic the way other people do. That doesn't mean they don't feel pressure. They do. But they understand something. Emotions, past decisions stay. So they learn not to choose in chaos. Because real leaders, they don't leak pressure, they absorb it. I want to share an experience with you from this past weekend. I was asked to speak at a boys' summit at Decaney High School. First session, there were 3 sessions, each 30 minutes sessions with a 10-15-minute Q&A. First session, I had about 6 young men in the room. So we just talked, had a real conversation. But the second session, we had about 40 boys walk in. Now, when you put 40 teenagers in a room, it was supposed to be 9th through 12th grade, but they ended up busting in some middle schoolers, which made it worse. But when you get these boys in a room, you're going to get some energy, high-level energy. A couple of them started being disruptive, want to talk. When I talk, I noticed it immediately. So I put one of the kids, first I put him in the front, then I put him out. A few minutes later, 4 more started making these weird sounds at one time, just chirping. I don't know what it was, so I put them out. Then another kid, he wants to raise his hand, wanted to ask questions while I was doing my presentation. Long story short, he ended up having to leave. Now at that point, something interesting happened. The whole room changed. Those boys sat there and they held on to my every word. They looked me in my mouth from the time I put the last gentleman out until we finished our session. And I realized something at that moment. Young men are not just listening to what you say, they're watching how you move. They're watching if you're steady. They're watching if you mean what you say. And when they see a man who's clear, calm, a man who doesn't panic under pressure, they lock in. Because leadership doesn't shout. I wasn't shouting, I was not loud. I just settled the room. And standing in that room watching those young men lock in, I thought about my father, because that's the kind of steadiness he carried, the kind that makes the room settle down, the kind that makes people pay attention, the kind that makes a man's scales not move. So the real key takeaways are simple. When a man understands his assignment, his movement changes. He moves with purpose. He moves with intention. He moves with responsibility, not louder, not angrier, just steadier. You remember the polygraph test my father took? The man looked at him and said, "Sir, your scales didn't move. This is crazy. I want you to know that wasn't luck, though. That was a lifetime of alignment, because my dad already knew who he was. And when a man already knows who he is, he doesn't negotiate with purpose. He stands on it. That's what purpose does in a man's life. It's the bridge between those who have it and those who are still searching for it. Because you, me, we, without it, spend a lifetime trying to become someone else. And there's nothing worse than a cheap copy of a great original. As men, we never try to be anybody else. We just move the way we're built to move. And when a man understands his assignment, his scales don't move either. Not when pressure shows up, not when chaos enters the room, because his movement was already decided. I'm K.R. Henderson, truth with oxygen. This is Second Wind.